I'm really grateful to our chairperson for convening this hearing in partnership with us and for so many of the areas in which we overlap. I want to note that one of the true great leaders on issues of antitrust is here next to me. Is Amy Klobuchar, who I know is under a lot of demand, as is Senator Blumenthal. There's a lot going on in the Senate today. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. It means a lot that you all would take time to come and give testimony in this important hearing. And I want to thank, obviously, you can see packed rooms, standing room only. I want to definitely thank the purple shirts here. I can recognize SEIU brothers and sisters when I see them. So thank you all for being here. Something that I know Mike Lee and I agree on is just this concept of liberty in the United States, this idea of freedom. And part of that idea, part of those conceptions is the idea of economic liberty as well, that powerful anti-competitive forces won't undermine the benefits you get from having liberty and the deals and opportunities for people to enter into the marketplace in a competitive fashion that expands the sense of the reality of opportunity for everybody. I'm a big believer that personal liberty is directly tied to economic liberty. These two freedoms should not be restricted to some by people who violate some of those laws of liberty. Throughout my time as a senator and before, I've worked to fight to make sure that all families and all workers really are able to access that liberty and not just the powerful, whether it's powerful political lobbies or powerful concentrations of economic power. When we talk about a competitive economy, what we're really talking about is ensuring that everyone has fair opportunities and a level playing field, that every entrepreneur making products people need or want has things like access to capital to start their first business, that every small business has tools to compete fairly against even the dominant players, that workers can switch jobs without being held back by non-compete or non-poach agreements between employers that undermines the power of labor. The rules are rigged in a society when monopolies prevent new entrants into a given industry, such as dominant megastores that make it almost impossible for mom and pop grocery stores to stay afloat. The rules are rigged when vertical integration is allowed and the largest health groups own both the insurance company, the pharmacy benefit manager, the pharmacy, and employs all the doctors. The rules are rigged when some of the country's wealthiest business people can dominate marketplaces by perverting rules, by donating millions of dollars to politicians. I believe watching the president's inauguration get millions and millions of dollars from people that were looking to abuse the system, and people who were not donating watch them get political favors. I believe the rules are rigged when the biggest players refuse to play fair and all the rest of us are the ones that lose. We're going to hear testimony today about the current state of the beef market in our country. It's something I focused a lot on, about how a lack of regulation combined with failing to enforce our antitrust laws has led over the past 3 decades to the top 4 beef packers expanding their market share from 32% to over 80%, and the devastating impact that's had on independent family farmers and ranchers, not to mention consumers. I've seen this devastation firsthand. I was just talking to one of our witnesses about several years ago. I went across this country to meet with farmers and ranchers and hear story after story about how the lack of competition was making it impossible for them to make ends meet. I'll never forget one rancher in Kansas when I was sitting at his kitchen table, how he told me about how his farm had been in his family for 5 generations, generation after generation, making it work. Hard work, hard scrabble, difficult work, but they were able to make a living and make a great life. I loved when he showed me the framed land grant on his wall when his great-great-grandfather acquired the land. But he was afraid that he would be the first one not to be able to pass the farm on to his children because of anti-competitive, unfair practices. He told me about how 30 years ago he used to have dozens of potential buyers for his cattle. But today he had just one buyer who didn't offer him a fair price. He didn't want me to take pictures. Now, talk about fear. He didn't want me to take any pictures while I was there because he was afraid that if his one buyer even found out that he had been talking to me, a policymaker, that he might get cut off. This is not fair. This is not right. If we want to ensure we have a competitive economy, we cannot restrict ourselves. Allow such anti-competitive actions to begin. Now look, I'm a former mayor. I've seen bad government regulations have unintended consequences and hurt people. But I don't believe that regulations are bad in and of themselves. It is wonderful when regulations actually achieve their goals and promote competition. But the primary focus when rulemakers are promulgating regulations is to make sure they're effective in the congressional intent. When promulgating rules, the first thought of the Consumer Product Safety Commission should be ensuring that dangerous products aren't able to make their way to store shelves and harm children. The FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, should be focused on preventing the spread of foodborne illnesses. These are regulations that help keep people alive. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, should be keeping our air and our water clean. As a guy who lives in Newark, New Jersey, I have seen the consequences when regulations aren't enforced and people get horrific diseases. A New Jersey-based pediatric oncologist recently reached out to my office and shared, quote, that as physicians, we take an oath to do no harm, but every day health professionals see patients whose health is harmed not by choices they make, but by the air they breathe, the heat they endure, and the environmental conditions that are out of their control. And often, these environmental conditions out of their control are in areas and communities like mine. Low-income communities. I live in the Central Ward of Newark, New Jersey, where I see people who do everything right. But the toxins in the air, toxins in their soil, toxins in the water endanger their lives. Our agencies must be focused on promulgating regulations that keep Americans safe and healthy. What I worry about is when people bring in a political philosophy that ultimately helps to weed out perhaps some good regulations, but often makes it easier for very powerful economic interests to inflict more harm on Americans. President Trump rolled back over 100 environmental regulations during his first administration. And I watched the pollutants of particulate matter in the air that my community, my state breathes, get worse, making conditions from emphysema to asthma get worse, costing people their health. In the second administration, he's already targeting environmental regulations that exist to keep our air and our water clean and from kids getting sick with cancer due to man-made pollutants. The idea that deregulation is the solution to our current lack of competitive markets is wrong if that is an eye towards eliminating the regulations to keep people safe. It is decades of de facto deregulation during which enforcers neglected to block anti-competitive mergers and challenge monopolies that has got ourselves to a situation today where we have such concentrated markets that work against the best interest. This picking and choosing of which regulations work for the most powerfully connected, armed with lobbyist organizations and not ones that are based upon keeping people healthy. To suggest that doubling down and further deregulating our excessively concentrated markets will only help undermine competition. This idea that deregulation will increase competition is in and of itself a flawed idea. It is the role of our antitrust enforcers, the Federal Trade Commission and the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice, to promote a competitive economy, a free market, and ensure our antitrust laws are being fully enforced. If we want to support competition, we must empower our federal antitrust enforcers. Congress must increase their funding and provide them access to merger filing fees so they have the resources to challenge anti-competitive mergers that enable consolidation and full staffing to conduct investigations to uncover anti-competitive activities. If we want to fight anti-competitive behavior, we cannot weaken the leadership of these agencies. A president who unlawfully removes 2 Democratic commissioners, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya, is not focused on fighting concentration. In fact, that kind of rank partisanship is undermining our ability to have a more fair market. It is actually enabling powerful business donors to make sure they don't face rollbacks when their companies are attempting to finalize anti-competitive mergers. This is corruption. This is corruption. When those folks who are before these agencies seeking mergers can give millions and millions of dollars to politicians to get their way. This is corruption. And if we want to repeal anti-competitive regulations, we do so in accordance with the administration's Procedure Act's required notice and comment process. We do not embed a group, and forgive me to all the undergraduates here, but we do not embed a group of undergraduates into our federal agencies and have them to rely on a black box AI algorithms to determine which regulations to keep and which ones to eliminate. I'd like to enter into the record this article entitled "Doge Put a College Student in Charge of Using AI to Rewrite Regulations."
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. During today's hearing, I look forward to examining the many ways in which the federal government can ensure that every American, every business, no matter what their size, has the ability to fairly compete. Our democracy, our economy benefits from fair competition. How we prevent regulatory capture by some of America's wealthiest companies who are putting more and more money into political contributions, more and more money into lobbying. How do we have a system that's fair when they can put unlimited funds to lobby these rulemaking agencies and to give to the politicians who are exercising control over them? How do we empower our federal agencies to enforce our antitrust laws? Every American, every business, every worker deserves to have that economic liberty. And I look forward to hearing our witnesses on how we can do that and perhaps how we can have a market that is free at last, thank God Almighty. Could be free at last. Thank you very much. Coming from you, that's extraordinary. Mr. Chairman, I yield my microphone to you, sir, for the introduction.